The room went silent the moment she said it. Not the normal kind of silence, but the kind that feels like something has already broken and everyone is just waiting for it to fall apart completely. My future mother-in-law smiled at me and announced, "From today, you will financially support my son for life. That is your responsibility as his wife." I felt my fiancée squeeze my hand, but she wasn't stopping it. She was agreeing with it. And that's when I smiled. Because in that exact second, I already knew something they didn't know I knew. I slowly stood up and said, "Actually, I think everyone should meet someone here tonight." I turned toward the back of the hall, and the man sitting in the shadows slowly stood up. The moment my fiancée saw him, her face turned completely white, because that man was her husband. But before we start today's story, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 32 years old, and what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life turned into the moment I discovered I was never part of her real life at all. The engagement hall was perfect on the surface. Golden lights, expensive decorations, soft music playing like everything was normal. Everyone was smiling, taking pictures, celebrating. But I wasn't relaxed, because from the beginning, something about this family never sat right with me. My fiancée, Melissa Hayes, 28, was always too controlled, too careful with her words. Like she had practiced every version of herself depending on who she was talking to. And her mother, Sandra Hayes, 55, was worse. She didn't ask questions like a normal future mother-in-law. She gave instructions. And her son, Brian, 30, was a topic that always came up, but never in a real way. Always between jobs, always sensitive, always someone who needed support. I thought it was just family dependence. I was wrong. The moment Sandra tapped her glass and stood up, I felt the shift. She smiled at everyone and said proudly, "Daniel will now take full responsibility for Brian. He is unemployed and he deserves a life of comfort. That is what marriage means." A few people laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. But I looked at Melissa. She didn't laugh. She nodded, like this was already agreed. That's when my chest tightened, because I realized something very important. This wasn't a request, it was a condition. Sandra continued, "A strong husband supports not just his wife, but her entire family." Then she looked directly at me. "As of today, Brian is your responsibility." Silence hit the room. I slowly leaned back in my chair. I could have reacted. I could have argued. But I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I had already started preparing for this moment days ago. I said softly, "Interesting." That word changed everything. Sandra frowned. "What's interesting?" I stood up slowly, and that's when I did something that made the entire room go quiet again. "I think there's someone here who should hear this arrangement too." People started looking around confused. Melissa's smile faded slightly. "Daniel, what are you doing?" But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at the back of the hall, at the man I had noticed earlier, sitting alone, watching everything too carefully. Like he wasn't a guest, but a witness. I raised my hand. "Please come forward." The man hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw fear flash across Melissa's face for the first time. Not surprise. Fear. He stood up slowly and walked forward, and when the light hit his face properly, the entire room changed. Melissa turned pale instantly. Her mother's expression froze, because she recognized him. He stopped beside me. I looked at him and said calmly, "Tell him who you are." He swallowed hard. "My name is Adrian Wells." A pause. And then he added, "And I am legally married to Melissa Hayes." The room exploded in whispers. Sandra shouted immediately, "That is impossible." Melissa stepped forward quickly. "No, this is not what it looks like." But Adrian shook his head slowly. "It's exactly what it looks like." My heart didn't race, because I already suspected it. I pulled out my phone, opened the file, and turned the screen toward everyone. A marriage certificate official, registered, real, Melissa's name, Adrian's name, 2 years old. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Sandra grabbed the table. "This is fake," Adrian said quietly. "It's not fake. We got married in a civil court. She told me it was temporary." Melissa turned to me desperately. "Daniel, please listen." I raised my hand. "Don't." Not angry, just done, because I was still watching something else, her reaction. Not shock, not confusion, panic. Like this wasn't the first time she had been caught. I looked at Adrian. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. 2 years. The room gasped again. 2 years. And I had been engaged for 6 months. Sandra's voice dropped slightly now. "This is a misunderstanding." But I interrupted her. "No, it's a pattern." That word hit harder than anything else. Melissa whispered, "What do you mean?" I turned toward her slowly. I think I'm not the first." Silence. Adrian looked down and then said something that froze the entire hall. "I think you're the third." Everything stopped. Even breathing felt loud. Melissa shook her head rapidly. "That's not true. That's not." but her voice broke, and that break said everything. Then it happened. The hall doors at the back slammed shut hard. Everyone turned instantly. A staff member ran to check. Locked. Sandra panicked. "What is going on?" And then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. "Don't trust anyone in that room." I looked up slowly, at Adrian, at Melissa, at Sandra, and for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The truth wasn't finished yet. It was just getting started. And then the lights flickered once, before everything went dark. The lights didn't just go off. They died. 1 second the hall was full of shocked faces, and the next, everything was swallowed by complete darkness. For a moment nobody moved, then someone screamed. A chair fell. Someone else shouted, "Open the doors," but there was no response from outside. I stood still. Because in situations like this, panic doesn't help. Observation does. And I noticed something immediately. This wasn't a power failure. It was controlled. Sandra's voice cut through the dark, sharp and angry. "This is some kind of joke. Daniel, what have you done?" I didn't answer, because I was listening to something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the hall. Someone had entered, and they weren't in a hurry. A soft emergency light flickered on near the exit, barely lighting the room in red tones, enough for shadows, not enough for clarity. And then I saw him, Adrian. But he wasn't confused anymore. He looked different, too calm. Melissa's voice shook. "Adrian." He didn't look at her. He looked at me and said something I didn't expect. I knew this moment would come. That line changed everything. Sandra froze. "What are you talking about?" Adrian slowly reached into his pocket, not like a threat, like a confirmation. He pulled out a folded document, then another, and said quietly, "She didn't tell you the full story." Melissa stepped forward. "Stop it." But he continued anyway. "She didn't just marry me." A pause. "She married 2 others before me." The room erupted again. Sandra screamed, "Lies." But Adrian finally looked at her directly. "No. Records." He turned slightly toward me, and he already found them. I didn't react. Because, yes, I had found pieces, but not the full picture. Not yet. Melissa's breathing got faster. "Daniel, please, you don't understand." I finally spoke. "Then explain it." Silence. Even the panic around us slowed down, because now everyone was listening. Melissa swallowed hard. And for the first time, her voice wasn't controlled. It was broken. "I never meant for it to go this far." Adrian let out a cold laugh. "That's what you said to me too." She flinched. Sandra stepped between them. "Enough, you're humiliating my daughter." Adrian's voice turned sharper. "No, Sandra, you trained her." That hit the room differently. Even Sandra paused. Adrian continued. "This isn't random. This is a pattern. Every man she gets close to, the same structure appears." He looked at me again. "You, Daniel, you were just the next stage." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So Brian," I said slowly, "the unemployed brother, the financial dependency, that was also part of it." Melissa didn't answer. That silence was my answer. Sandra suddenly shouted, "He is our family. Of course we take care of him." Adrian shook his head. "There is no Brian." The room went dead silent again. I blinked. "What?" Adrian looked at me. "There is no unemployed brother. That identity is used to extract money from each target. It changes depending on the situation." I felt the ground shift under me. Everything I had been told, every story, every explanation, a script. Melissa finally broke. "Stop it, please." But Adrian wasn't stopping anymore. "Tell him the truth," he said. "Tell him how many men." Melissa shook her head violently. "I didn't have a choice." I stepped forward. "Everyone has a choice." That made her look at me. For the first time, she didn't have a mask left, only exhaustion. "I was raised in this," she whispered. "My mother, she built this system. I was just supposed to follow it." Sandra snapped instantly. "You were supposed to survive." That line revealed everything, not survival system. I looked at Sandra. "You built this?" She didn't deny it. That silence confirmed it. Adrian spoke again quietly. "She doesn't marry for love." He paused. "She marries for access." My mind replayed everything. The emotional timing, the rushed engagement, the controlled conversations, the financial suggestions disguised as family responsibility. It all aligned now. And I hated how clean it looked in hindsight. Suddenly a loud metallic sound came from the door. Someone outside was forcing it open. Melissa looked toward it immediately. Fear again. But this time, not of exposure. Of consequences. Sandra stepped back. No, they weren't supposed to arrive yet. That sentence changed everything again. I turned sharply. Who wasn't supposed to arrive? Before anyone could answer, the door burst open. Bright white light flooded the hall, and silhouettes entered. Not guests, not staff, authorities, real ones. One of them stepped forward and said loudly, "Everyone stay where you are." Sandra collapsed into a chair instantly. Melissa didn't move. Adrian exhaled slowly, like he had been waiting for this moment for years. And I just stood there, because now it all made sense. This wasn't just betrayal. It was an investigation that had already been running long before I walked in. A woman stepped forward from the group, calm voice, controlled authority. Her eyes locked on Melissa. "We've been tracking this pattern for 18 months, Melissa whispered. "No," I nodded. "Yes. And tonight was the final confirmation." She looked at me briefly. "And you helped complete it." That's when I understood. I wasn't just the victim in this story. I was the trigger. The final missing piece. Sandra suddenly shouted. "She did nothing wrong. This is family business." The woman turned to her. "Multiple identity fraud, financial exploitation, coordinated deception." Then she looked back at Melissa. "It's over." Melissa finally turned to me. Her voice was barely audible. "Daniel, I did care about you." I held her gaze. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. "No," I said softly. "You cared about what you could get from me." That broke her completely. As they moved in, Sandra screamed, Melissa broke down, Adrian stepped aside quietly, and I stayed still, watching the collapse of a system that had probably survived for years without consequence, but not anymore. As the hall emptied and silence returned, Adrian walked past me. He stopped and said quietly, "Thank you." I nodded. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who accidentally walked into a fire and somehow survived it. When I finally stepped outside, the cold air hit differently. Cleaner, heavier, real. And I realized something I won't forget. Some people don't enter your life by accident. They are placed there by patterns you don't understand yet, until the truth finally forces everything into the light. And when it does, you don't lose a relationship. You lose an illusion you were never supposed to believe in. If this story kept you hooked until the end, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story. And remember, sometimes the truth isn't what we expect. It's what we choose to believe before we have all the facts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.